Hi, guys, and welcome to the second episode of the Creative Knit-ensions podcast. My name is Tanya, and you can find me on Ravelry as T Knit Pearl. You can also find me on Instagram as T Knit Pearl, and I invite you guys to join the Ravelry group for this podcast. You can find it by going on Ravelry and hitting the little groups tab and searching for Creative Knit-ensions, or you can probably just go to my profile under people by searching T Knit Pearl and find it from there. But yeah, it's pretty quiet since, it's just me talking to myself. It's effectively like a podcast. It's a little bit meta, but how are you guys doing this week? I think it's been about 2 weeks since the last time we talked, roughly. I'm recording this on Saturday, March 12th. I've been pretty sick the last week or so, and so you might be able to hear it in my voice. Every once in a while, it kind of gets a little bit hoarse. And at various points this week, I had no voice, which, for those of you who have ever met me in person, you could probably imagine that doesn't go well. I'm a bit of a perpetual talker, if you will. So it doesn't go well when I can't talk. And it was especially awkward because my husband, fabulous as he is, doesn't understand like common mime signals. So I would be like, and he'd be like, what do you want? What is it, Lassie? What is it, girl? And I'd be like, dude, it's my phone. Just give me the phone. Or there was another one that he couldn't get. Or I'd be like holding my cup of tea, and I'd be like, and he'd be like, what is it? What is it? You want a cat? What do you what? And I'm like, I don't really judge him because he and I are both very bad at being sick, but yeah, he puts up with a lot. But anyway, enough about talking about how I've been miserable all week. Let's talk about knitting. So, before we really get into any of the finished objects that I have to show you guys today, I'm going to tell you one of my, I don't want to say pet peeves and I don't want to say dirty little secrets, but it's somewhere in between both of those for me. I like to plan knitting projects. I like to sit down and put together like a giant list and share it with everybody so that everybody knows what I'm trying to do and I can be really accountable and I can do this awesome thing and then I kind of change my mind. I do that a lot, particularly with sweater patterns. Excuse me, sorry. Um, Last summer I decided, oh, I'm totally going to do 10 sweaters in a couple of months for the Harry Potter House Cup that I'm a part of. And I plotted it all out and I had all my sweaters and I had it in my queue on Ravelry and I was super duper duper organized. And I even had the yarns that I was going to use and I knew exactly how I was going to do it. And of those 10 sweaters, while I did actually do 10 sweaters in that time frame, I think 2 of them were the ones that I had planned for before I started the giant insane plotting. I'm not really good at kind of saying, I'm going to do this pattern, I'm going to buy yarn for this pattern, and I'm going to stick it out. It's not something I don't want to say not talented at. It's not really a talent, but I don't have that kind of follow through to pick a pattern, pick some yarn, buy some yarn, and use it exclusively for that. Or at least not months in advance, because I've done that numerous times for something that I then cast on pretty soon after. But when it comes to bigger things, like planning a sweater that I want to work on months in advance, it just doesn't happen, guys. It doesn't even get close. I'll stick to the general framework of, oh, I want to do 10 sweaters in this time period, and then I will swap them out. I'm not as in love with it. I saw something in an issue of a magazine that I just did fall in love with. Whatever. And so I'll start with finished objects, but you'll understand how this makes perfect sense for my current works in progress because you haven't seen them. You actually haven't even seen the yarn for it. I don't want to say I lied last time because I'll probably work on a lot of that stuff that I said I was going to, but just not right now. Yeah. And sorry, I had to deflect a cat. As those of you who may actually podcast yourselves, I have like a precarious situation here of, here are my works in progress, and here are my finished objects, and here are things I want to talk about, and here are my notes, and it's all a bit of a hot mess. And so I don't want the cat to come by and be like, oh, what's this? Twap. That's Molly, in case you're wondering. Molly is the eternal twap. What's this? I'm going to eat it. So I had to kind of shoo her away. So starting with finished objects, you guys might notice I am wearing one of them. This is my Roxborough cardigan, or I believe it's Roxborough pullover by Courtney Kelly. It was in a past issue of Knitsy magazine, and I decided to. The original pattern was done in a 2-stripe repeat, rather 2 colors. I decided to do it in a 4-stripe repeat, and so the yarn I chose to use was this deep purple here is called Wind Dew. This gray is called Don't Blink. This coppery color that comes off a little bit bronzy is Fargo. And this light purple is Jenny, Jenny, Jenny. And they are all from Nerd Girl yarns on the Conspiracy base. It's a bamboo and wool blend, so it's got a really cool touch to it because of that bamboo content. But as you guys can even see here on my crappy little camera, look at that shine. It's got so much shine and so much luster to it. Oh, I'm like obsessed with this thing. There were about 1,000 ends to it, though, as I kind of posted on Instagram. I always try and convince myself, like, oh, I don't have to weave in my ends as I go. It's not that big a deal. I'll totally do it at the end. Guys, don't let me lie to you. Don't let me lie to me. I will never weave in the ends at the end. Case in point, my next finished object. And you'll notice the purple, the light gray, and the light purple. I decided to use the scraps from this project to make my own version of a Waiting for Rain shawl as part of the knit along in the Yarngasm group for Kristen Vine's podcast. And I don't know, the original pattern has kind of a short roll lace inset here, a short row lace inset here, another one here, and then one across kind of the bottom band. And guys, I modified the pattern a lot. I mean, the original pattern's only in one color. And so, as you can see, I kind of started in one color, and then I got a little bit stripy. This is the second lace insert. And again, you can start to see some of the ends that I didn't weave in. But I really like the way that this lace insert actually came out. I think it's a little bit deeper than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a lot thinner. But I kind of like that depth, and I like the look that it gives the shawl. Coming over to the first lace insert. No, actually, that was the first one. Down here is the second one. And the second one came out a lot better. It is much thinner, and it's got that kind of compactness that I was looking for in the pattern. But rather than doing a third lace inset, I decided to just do this strip of straight non-short road lace all across the bottom border. And I'm not going to lie, this thing is huge. I said that about Mina's shawl last week, but this one's, I mean, come on. This thing's just massive. And hello, ends. You're not getting weaved in anytime soon. But yeah, that's my Waiting for Rain shawl with all of my modifications. And you'll notice, it's funny, when I was listening to the Wool Gathering podcast, Meredith, who finished a version of the Waiting for Rain shawl pretty recently, was saying that she was dropping her yarn overs on the wrong side of the pattern along the edging so that this would have a nice firm edge to it. And I know from experience from doing my color affection shawl that that's a good idea. That's what I should have done, because this edge has no stretch to it. You'll actually see, and it's pretty clear in the picture, guys. Look, crappy camera work helps sometimes. But there's this like pocket up here. It's not a short row or anything. It just came out like that. And that as a result of my modifications, the shawl has a strange shape to it. And when you pair that with that really rough upper edge, there's no blocking this out. There's just not. But I will say it drapes really nicely over the back, into the front. And apparently today is wear all the knits day, if you can see on this podcast, between the shirt, the sweater that we'll talk about in a little bit, and the shawl. But yeah, I mean, it's a nice, cozy, oversized shawl. It did only take me about a week, maybe, to work on, but I will qualify that by saying I was actually on vacation for 2 of those days, so I had a little bit more knitting time than usual. But yeah, I mean, I like my modifications. I know that the designer Sylvia Bobilia has released a kind of hacking the waiting for rain shawl modification where you can use some of the tips that she created for a modified version to kind of do, some of the things that I did, like some of this striping for colors or doing the lace inserts in a different color. And I really encourage you guys to kind of take a look at that if you're thinking about this shawl. It's definitely a beautiful shawl. I mean, there's no taking that away from it. But there is apparently dropping it on the floor, which is what I just did. But for me, I wanted to make it my own because it is such a basic pattern. It almost felt like a recipe to me. So I used it like that. And what I kind of find funny is obviously these were scraps from this top of mine that I made. And I was really excited I had enough of the silver, the light purple, and the dark purple to do this. Remember how I was talking about my color affection shawl that I made? I made this thing last summer after I had surgery. It was one of the first big projects I worked on. And as I was knitting on this semicircular shawl in dark purple, light purple, and gray, I came to realize that it felt pretty eerily similar to my color affection. Guys, yeah. You guys might be thinking, oh, that's a lovely shawl. It looks like you use the same exact colors. No. This is a flock sock base by Holiday Yarns, and no, you're not accidentally seeing double or anything like that. The colors are uncanny, the similarity. So I now own 2 semicircular shawls effectively in the same colors. And obviously, I wear my color affection all the time. I would say it's probably, of all the shawls I've made, and I've made, probably a good 20, 30, maybe even more shawls at this point in my knitting career. It's definitely the shawl I wear the most. I get the most wear out of it in the summer, just wearing it over garments. In the winter, using it as more of like a oversized wrap kind of thing. It definitely gets used a fair amount. But again, it just kind of, guys, it kind of sucks that I didn't even know I was doing that. But it definitely speaks towards, you get this kind of idea of colors in your head and the kind of things that you buy because of that interest you have in certain colors, and you go with it. I'm not one of those people who, if you look at my stash, you're going to find like an overwhelming abundance of a certain color family. Shockingly, excuse me, my stash is very kind of balanced. There is a little bit of a weight towards blues and greens and purples and grays and oranges and yellows. But as you guys are probably thinking, that's a large chunk of the rainbow, so I don't know. There's not a lot of red. That's pretty much it. I like color. Sorry. But in terms of works in progress, this is what I was talking about earlier when I say I can't commit to a pattern. Thankfully, I can commit to men. I mean, my husband and I have been married about 4 years, but apparently that's all. I decided to start working on a pattern that's been in my queue for ages. And guys, I feel like I'm sharing like my biggest secret in the knitting world with you right now, but this book, the Rhinebeck Sweater book by Isolde Teague, is hands down my favorite knitting book. People are always talking about, oh, what do I need in my knitting book stash? If you are a sweater knitter, even if you're not a sweater knitter, even if you want to be a sweater knitter or you're a really big fan of indie dyers, this book needs to be in your library. Like, it's okay if you pause this and go over to Amazon or to Ravelry and buy yourself a pattern, and we can just kind of flip through together. We'll do a read along, but no, seriously. I it's going to sound really sad and poetic and a little bit overly waxing, but I remember my husband used to work a job where he had absurd hours. Like he was working, 12 days in a row, like 16, 18-hour shifts for about 2 years. I never saw him on Saturday, ever, ever on a Saturday, even though he was supposed to have Saturdays off. And he had one Saturday off, and we decided to go into Manhattan. And I live in an outer borough. I live in Queens, even though it's in New York City. And so convincing me rather, to go into Manhattan is such an adventure. It's probably akin for other people in like more rural states of going to like IKEA. You got to psych yourself up and you have to really want to do it. And there has to be motivation. And in my case, there has to be yarn on the other end. And so we got together and we went on this trip to Pearl Soho and a bunch of other lower Manhattan yarn stores. I know a lot of podcasters talk about Pearl Soho, but there are also several other yarn stores in downtown Manhattan, like the Lion Brand Yarn Studio, which carries their exclusive high-class yarns and stuff, and there's some really nice yarns in that line, in addition to an always changing and fabulous window display from them, made entirely out of yarn. There's Downtown Yarns in the East Village, which is so super tiny, but actually has a phenomenal selection. There's Seaport Yarns down by, guys, you guessed it, the Seaport in Lower Manhattan by the World Trade Center, as well as a couple of other little kind of tiny places. But we went to all of them, and our last stop was Pearl Soho, and I saw this book, and I didn't know this book existed. It wasn't like I went for it in particular or anything. And I saw the price tag on it, which in the US can be a little bit steep when you're buying it as retail. It's $38 US. And I immediately picked up the book. The quality of this book, the printing. You can tell I'm such an eternal reader. I mean, I still own print books, and you might be able to see behind us, but I had to have it. And so I went home and I pored over the pages, and at that point I was knitting sweaters, but I didn't necessarily think I could take on any of the sweaters in this book. And so fast forward a couple years, someone who's not me can do the math, because those of you who know me know how horrible I am at math. And you guys can probably hear that this is a hefty book. It's so well made, but one of the sweaters I've been lusting over for years is the Mulberry Street Pullover by Melissa Worley. And you can see it's kind of a basic pullover, but what she does that's interesting is she uses a worsted weight yarn with a contrasting lace weight. So that's the green yarn that you kind of see flecked in different places. And it has this unique kind of keyhole in the back. And I always thought this would be, I know it's in the Rhinebeck Sweater book and it's supposed to be more kind of like fall themed. And one of the notes that she mentions in kind of the little snippet about the pattern is, oh, this would be so great for ventilation on some of those warmer Rhinebeck weekends. But I always kind of imagine this pattern as a phenomenal transitional knitting, kind of like the summer period even, when those mornings that are a little bit cool. And so I knew, guys, this next little bit, I think all my sweaters are going to basically be a walking advertisement for Nerd Girl yarns, so I'm sorry about that, but I knew fairly early on that I wanted to use Parlay by Nerd Girl Yarns, which is a believe it's like a 40%, oh, well, no, I don't have a tag in it. About a 40% tencel or bamboo blend with wool. So actually holding the yarn in my hand, it's about, I don't know, it's like 60 degrees, maybe 70 degrees here today. The yarn feels so physically cool to the touch. I only used this yarn once before, and it was when I was knitting a cowl for someone in a swap last summer. And so I was sitting in the middle of Madison Square Park on a hot day, baking in the sun, and knitting, and my hands felt so cool because of the yarn. And I always kind of remember that as a like tactile experience that I wanted to repeat. And so this color is Institute of the Arts. It's probably not going to show really well here, but it is a gray that because of that bamboo content has all of that sheen to it. That's not this light right here blowing it out. That's just the sheen that this yarn has. And throughout it has a little bit of like little more whiter sections of gray, a little bit more gray sections of gray. And so that's what I'm using as my worsted. But for my contrast, one of the things that Nerd Girl Yarns does, in my opinion, better than almost anyone else, is like wackadoodle variegated. It's typically based off of, again, you guessed it, particularly nerdy things. And she recently released a color inspired by Zelda. And for those of you who are familiar with the video game, you're going to look at this and you're going to go, yep, that's our princess. And so it is whites and yellow, but in that like really rich mustardy kind of coppery yellow and purple, and I adore it. And so for me, these are the two yarns that I'm kind of using, and I like the general construction of this sweater. It is a bottom-up sweater, which means that for me, since I've done so many kind of sweaters in that construction, I can just knit, I can just knit, I can just work on it. I know what I typically have to do for shaping, which is ignore what the pattern says and do what my body says. But I've gotten pretty far. This is at the point where I'm putting it down so that I can start working on my sleeves. I did knit it. I always modify, guys, and so it's a little bit longer than the pattern calls for. It's also, let me see if I can get there without pulling out all my ends. I also modify the craziness out of, here we go, out of my seams, and so I'm hoping, I'm not sure how well it'll come across, but you can see how I kind of do my decreases in a little bit of a funky way, but it makes that really pretty seam, and I'm going to try and hold this so that you guys can see some of that fleckiness in here. But yeah, that's the making or the start of my mulberry street, and I'm pretty excited to finish that. For me, I'm mostly a monogamous-ish knitter. So what that means, and again, guys, sorry about all the coughing. It's that or I will probably die. I don't know. What happens if you don't cough when you need to cough? But I typically will only work on a project at a time. If I put something into a timeout, it never comes back. It just gets frogged. But I've been trying to get to the point where I'm always knitting on the sweater and I'm always knitting on the shawl because those are the type of projects I prefer to knit. And so I'm working on the mulberry street. And so, of course, I had to start a shawl. Now, I'm going to kind of give you guys like some fun backstory on this. The reason I started this was because the New York knit nerds were getting together for a meetup at the bookstore Word in Brooklyn. And I needed something I could work on without having to be all up in it. Like, you know, we all need those projects where when you're with someone or where you're out and about or commuting that you can knit on without looking at the stitches and playing with every single stitch. And so I decided to start the Neon Beast by Vera Valmaki. I think that's right. If it's not, guys, someone's going to correct me. This thing's called Beast for a reason. And I knit a lot of shawls, and I like larger shawls, like my Waiting for Rain that's currently got a kitten sitting on top of it, or my Color Affection, which the kitten's also sitting on top of. But this one's a beast even for me, and I'm not even that far into it. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Neon Beast, it's a large wingspan shawl that features 3 different colors, some stripy sections, which you can kind of start to see in this region. That was my first section of stripes, but it is exclusively garter. And so for this shawl, I'm using 3 colors of Rustic Fingering by Neighborhood Fiber. I purchased all 3 of these in preparation for this project at Rhinebeck this past year. And so this is the Rock Creek Park colorway, which you will recall I had said I was starting a sweater in the DK version of Rock Creek Park colorway by Neighborhood Fiber Company. I lied. My second color is, as you probably saw from when I was holding up the shawl, this beautiful orange. The name of this colorway is Delray. And then I'm working with this gray here. Sorry about that. With this gray here, I don't currently have the color on me, so I can't tell you guys what that is. But yeah, I mean, it feels really massive. I'm not very far along, and I think part of the reason that I've gotten so much done on the Mulberry Street is because that shawl scares me. I mean, it just feels like a lot. It feels like a lot of knitting, and I knit a lot. Do you guys get that? Do you ever just get straight up intimidated by a project halfway through it? And like, I'm looking, guys, you can see I am I have it laying on the table right here, and I'm just staring at it in fear of it almost. It's like the saddest thing. Like, it's just yarn and some sticks. Why am I so scared? But I am. So I hope by the next time that we all talk, I'll be able to share with you a finished Mulberry Street and probably not a finished Neon Beast. If you guys follow me on Instagram, hopefully you can keep an eye on me and make sure I don't go insane trying to work on that thing. Because that's a legitimate fear for me. But I think something I really wanted to talk to you guys about after last week was the idea of sweater knitting. Whenever I tell someone I knit a lot of sweaters, the immediate response I get is always something similar. It's always like, you're crazy, you must be insane, or where do you get all that time to knit, or some kind of variation of that. And to me, I think sometimes I forget how I first felt about sweater knitting when I first got started. And so when I first started knitting, the idea of making a sweater seemed absolutely jackpot crazy absurd. Plain and simple. Like, I just couldn't understand the idea that somebody would actually enjoy making these. Or that it wouldn't, like, be a magnum opus kind of, like, take your whole life kind of project. Like, I would look at patterns, and there were so many instructions, there were so many stitches, and it was legitimately like a foreign language. I mean, Natog. Do you know what that is? Probably. I mean, those of you who have knit a few patterns featuring decreases are probably aware that Natog is how crazy people, like myself, would pronounce a knit two together. But it just seems so absurd to me. There were all of these words and abbreviations and things that I didn't know about, and there was a notion list longer than, like, I expected the finished length of the sweater to be. And I was straight up, like, intimidated by that idea. I mean, I pretty much resolved myself to the concept of sweaters must be easy if you're petite. And that seems a little bit awkward, but that's always kind of been my default answer in life. It's got to be because of my weight. I've got a lot of weight to me. Again, we've talked about this, and being that this is a video podcast, you're not oblivious to that. But I mean, it always just made more sense to blame the fact that I had 47 inches of bust to accommodate for rather than the idea that maybe knitting a sweater was daunting to me. And so that had to be what it was. I mean, 47 inches of sweater meant that I needed legitimately hundreds of yards more, dozens of dollars more to make a simple sweater than somebody who was like 32 inches. And so I gave up for a while at even the idea of it. It was just too intimidating for me. But as I like to say in a blog post that I kind of wrote about this and never published, baby, it was cold outside, and Mama needed herself some knitting sweaters. And so I'm a pretty stubborn person. So as soon as I made my mind up on the idea that I was going to knit a sweater, it, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to knit a sweater. That's happening. There was no really like changing my mind. And again, it's a little waxing experience of my husband and I sitting in Manhattan, but we had gone to the Central Park Zoo one day, and I brought a copy of Interweave Knits with me. And it had an excerpt of a pattern from November Knits. And for you guys who are familiar with Interweave publications, you're probably aware that they do little samples of different works or different pieces that they have their book deals for. So it's kind of like free publishing, or free publishing, but free marketing in that respect. You'll see it in the magazine and you'll go, oh, I have to make that. And you'll hopefully buy the book, even though you have the pattern for that. But, kind of giving you a taste of what you'll find in that issue and hoping that you'll enjoy. And so I fell in love with the cover sweater here, the burdock cardigan. And I remember I looked at Michael and I was like, what about this pattern? Do you think I can knit this sweater? And I think we talked last week about how Michael is my pattern reader. He learned to knit exclusively to help me knit patterns because I can't read that foreign language on my own. Again, knit to talk. Were you guys listening like 30 seconds ago? But he just kind of gave the pattern a quick look and he was like, oh yeah, we got this. And so off to Knitty City we went, where we purchased 7 freshly wound skeins Malabrigo worsted. Yeah, some of you are probably making weird sound effects at the idea of using Malabrigo worsted in a sweater, especially someone's first sweater, but we'll be okay. And so, we got home and I was so excited, and it was the middle of winter, and I wanted to knit myself a sweater, and are you kidding me? I have to do a swatch first. Seriously? I'm just gonna use these needles. It's fine. Whatever. No. Michael made me swatch. And he made me swatch again. And he made me swatch again. You can imagine how challenged our marriage was for this period of time. But I did the swatch. And I was so angry at that little swatch, guys. You don't understand. I was working on that swatch, and I really, I could have killed someone. I was looking at this little square, and it's frustrating all this negative energy into this little square thing. I was just so annoyed. I was like, if this swatch is taking this long, this is really going to take me the rest of my life to knit a sweater. That's just what it had to be. And I remember the whole process just felt really frustrating and overwhelming, and it was ready to cast on, and ready to be cast on, and I cast on, and I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel right about it. I didn't feel like this was even something I felt confident enough to do. But my husband walked me through it, and I was knitting along, in my body, and then I hit the sleeves. You'll hear in this podcast, I'm sure, I hate sleeves. I love sleeves. Obviously, they're there for warmth. They make comfortable clothing. They typically tend to make raglan stay up on my body. I hate sleeves. They're so annoying to knit. And so I had to make 2 of them. And I made 2 of them before I could do anything else in this sweater. So I made the sleeves. And I couldn't connect them. It took Michael a half hour just to read that section of the pattern, and about another evening to put it together. And so then I somehow magically finished this sweater. There's one gaping problem. In a very literal sense, there was one gaping problem. There was a seam under each armpit, and I had to sew them. I literally, I pulled out my sewing machine and I sewed them shut on the inside with the right side spacing. Probably not the best thing to do with a sweater, but I had a finished sweater. I mean, I was pretty happy with it too. I mean, I wore it, it was exciting, it was comfortable, all that good stuff. But I never really felt confident in making the sweater. And as the sweater started to pill, because again, we talked about how it was Malabrigo worsted, and Malabrigo worsted is a single, I thought it was time to work on another sweater. And so I had pulled out my copy of Knit-Ensions, which again is in the required reading department for me. And I started on the Effortless cardigan. And I think that cardigan took me like 6 months, like legitimately. It took me maybe 6+ months to do the Effortless cardigan. And there were still a lot of issues with it when I was finished. And actually, I'm wearing it today to kind of show you guys some of those issues. And so, first thing you might notice, this is kind of where my collarbone is. So, sweater should kind of be resembling there, right? Well, it's not. It never is. And the reason for that is because I'm hoping you can see, I'm trying to kind of get into a position where you can, but see how if I hold this up against this light behind me that there are these eyelet rows? Well, those are the raglans for where the sleeves kind of jut out on this. And if I wear this sweater, you'll notice they are here. For where my arms are, I don't know about you guys, but I need them to be here. About 3 inches north of where they actually are. I mentioned I can't read patterns, and after a while Michael kind of left me on my own with this one, but I might have knit the fronts a little too long. If you guys aren't familiar, this is a front cardigan with the fronts open and draping, but you see how that goes off screen? Yeah. So, if I, again, notice how the raglan's like 1,000 miles too low. If I just kind of lift that here and it goes off screen and it keeps going. These front panels, I like legitimately can put them around my neck like that. You're not supposed to do that in the pattern. And actually, the other problem with this is when I knit it to the length that it said for the sleeves. I did. I really did. I didn't give up early like I do in a lot of sweaters nowadays because I had just gotten sick of knitting sleeves. These are not where my hands are. Try as I block, it didn't happen. And so I have this significantly, like even if and you guys can see, I've kind of been wearing it most of the episode, kind of open here, how unflattering this is. It's not the stripes that are making things look wicky-wacky. Maybe a little. But this makes me look so much wider than I am. And the fact that I don't think there's any way to show it, but this is where my underarm is. This is where the sleeve starts. Again, a couple inches away from where they should have. I do eventually plan to knit this cardigan again, probably in Neighborhood Fibers Studio Worsted. I knit my artichoke French from the Rhinebeck sweater book in the Studio Worsted, and I kind of fell in love with the base, so I think that would make a really good sturdy cardigan with this. But actually, as I do wear this a lot. This is probably one of my most worn sweaters, but in like in the sense of like I will wear it, belt it up, or I'll actually wear it as a blanket if I'm curled up on the couch, like a Snuggie. Yeah, that happens. Just to show you how insanely big this is. The other thing is, and it's not an issue with the yarn per se. I mean, I do wear this a lot. This thing pills to no end. There is no gleaner that can save this sweater at this point. It has been gleaned so much that I actually saved the Glean Bit Fuzzes pills from the sweater, and I will actually spin them together on a drop spindle to make kind of a chunky art yarn. And then I use that to mend little holes that I get in the sweater. Yeah. It's a little bit insane. Oh well. So, yeah, I really wanted to share my first sweater story with you guys. Maybe one of these weeks I'll pull it out and show you. Forewarning, um, it fit when I made it. I had lost a little bit of weight afterwards, and so it got a little bit too big. So we did some sweater surgery. The sleeves are Frankenstein with a sewing machine again. I mean, it felt only right. That's how I showed the underpit arm together. So, but yeah, I mean, it's still very comfortable. It's in a very flattering color for me. But yeah, I probably I feel like it's important to warn you guys. It looks a lot better thanks to surgery than it should. So, I guess that kind of concludes today's episode. If you guys have any questions or anything that you'd like to hear me talk about, reach out. Again, you can reach me on Instagram or on Ravelry as Knit-Pearl. Or we have the wow, that was hard. Or we have the Creative Knit-ensions group on Ravelry. I mean, and feel free to reach out about anything you'd like to hear me talk about, or if you kind of wanted something specific that I didn't cover. Or, I mean, I guess you can kind of come over and complain about how I keep coughing. That's cool, too. Whatever gets you by at night. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us today and for putting up with my gravelly voice and my occasional interruptions to try and grasp in a breath through my bronchial lungs. I really do thank you guys for joining if this is your first time, or for joining us again if this is your second time. And I look forward to chatting with you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed your knitting and hopefully your cup of tea or warm beverage, or maybe with some of the weather, if you guys have been having what we have, you just went straight for the margarita, and I couldn't blame you. So, thanks, guys.